So all the different forms is just a whole stack of them that we need to have like a one entire day, one entire morning for that. So today we have this brief program. So it's basically a kind of an overview of the Code of Canon Law. You know, what is the Code of Canon Law? How it comes to us? Where the Code of Canon Law comes from? You know, how is it structured? How it's divided? You know, how important it is for us. So we will see all that. But before we do that, we'd like to hear the name of each one of you and the parish you are coming from.
I'm Jeff Allen from St. Vincent de Paul.
His wife Mindy.
Tom Nickel from St. Mary's in West Haven.
His wife Maria.
Oh, you're the hotel. I saw you where she went.
Rocio Kalishaw from St. Francis Xavier.
Robert Kalisha from St. Francis.
Gregory Working from St. Thomas More.
Jeremy and Melissa Costello from St. Joseph.
Very nice to meet all of you. So, I'm going to do the presentation, and at the end of the afternoon, the brief half afternoon, we will handle some books for you and some readings from this session, and then from next session. So kind of a read assignment, and then we will meet again. I believe it's the middle of December, sometime, somewhere around that time. So let's begin today. So as I told you, I'm Father Silva, and my first presentation is on the topic of the Second Vatican Council and the Code of Canon Law. It's kind of an overview, a historical overview, and all with all the sources of the law in the life of the Church. So let me begin by saying that the Second Vatican Council was perhaps the most profound religious event of the 20th century in the life of the Church. Our world Church was gathered to consider who it was and where it wanted to go. So much was said and much followed. So today there is much to be said and much to be done. So having that in mind, we have celebrated already 52 years after the conclusion of the Second Vatican Council, and 34 years after the promulgation of the current Code of Canon Law. And this is probably one of the most current issues in church matters. So if we want to study the law of the Church, we just cannot go and open the Code of Canon Law because it wouldn't make any sense. We have to go back to its sources, and we have to go back immediately to the Second Vatican Council. And the same difficulty we have probably today when we begin to study canon law was the same difficulty that the Church has in 1956 when Pope John the 23rd wanted to reform the Code of Canon Law. So there is an intimate connection between the Council and the Code of Canon Law, which I will explain in simple words. Once the Church decided to renovate the Code of Canon Law, it was necessary to wait until the Council was concluded, and later several years to study the content to establish the legal implications of the new doctrine. In October of 2005, Pope Benedict XVI addressed the crowd, remembering the celebration of the anniversary of the conclusion of the Second Vatican Council, which happened in December 8 of 1965. So he made a specific reference to the documents of the Second Vatican Council with the following words: "Dear brothers and sisters, while I invite you to take in your hands these documents, I call you to pray with me to the Blessed Virgin Mary so that she may help all believers in Christ to keep alive the spirit of the Second Vatican Council, and so to contribute to install in the world universal fraternity to follow the will of God in the man created into the image of God. In addition, the Pope particularly urged joint efforts for the protection of the sanctity of life, the promotion of human dignity, the rights of the family, and the need to build a world of justice, reconciliation, and peace for future generations. So how many of you have the time to study the Second Vatican Council in some sort of capacity? Any particular document that struck your attention when you were doing that study? Lumen Gentium, why is that?
It was just something we had to read. It was just
Something you have to read.
required reading, so, but the Constitution of the Vatican.
Okay, the
It's very interesting.
Constitution. That's the proper way to address
Yeah.
the document, because the Apostolic Constitution, Lumen Gentium.
I like Gaudium Evangelii, I think, the proclamation of the gospel.
Okay, okay. That is a post-Vatican document. Yeah.
Same with Tom.
Okay, you just have to read the document.
Same.
The same. It's okay. Along the way, well, I thought you knew those documents by memory already. So anyway, I wasn't very probably over ambitious, but we will have to go back to those documents continually, because when we read a legal statement from the church, it is always related to the doctrine. It's not like in civil law. So our laws are always united to the doctrine. So we have to refer those to the Second Vatican Council, and by implication we have to refer those to the fathers of the church and to the councils of the church. So it's always that reference to those documents. Let me continue by saying that, so I'm going to explain you how the whole process came about. It was in January 25th, 1959, just 3 months after his election to the chair of Peter, that Pope John the 23rd, Angelo Roncalli, announced to the world 3 major events which will change the life of the Roman Catholic Church in the 20th century. Does anyone remember that day? Anybody have any recollection of that? So the Pope announced 3 different things. He announced the celebration of the Ecumenical Council, he announced the reform of the Code of Canon Law, and then the Synod of the City of Rome. So from the beginning of his pontificate, John the 23rd surprised the world not only by his renovated ideas and simplicity, but also by his humor. As you probably remember, up to this point, the popes were always kind of tall and very thin, kind of artistic figures. But with this election was totally different. When he came out to the balcony to be announced as a pope, there was one difficulty for him to come out. It was they couldn't find vestments for him because nothing could fit him. Yeah, he was kind of pretty round from head to toe. So before he came out, he said to the cardinal that was trying to help him with all kind of tailors around, he said, well, apparently everybody was thinking of me except the tailors. So from that moment, the tone of what he said that was very challenging for the church. The tone came in a very friendly but also very challenging tone for the universal church. So Pope John the 23rd wished the council to increase the favor and energy of Catholics to serve the needs of Christian people. So to achieve this purpose, bishops and priests must grow in holiness, The laity must be given effective instruction in Christian faith and morals. Adequate provision must be made for the education of children. Christian social activity must increase, and all Christians must have missionary hearts. So to that day, most of the things he referred was just basically a kind of a task for priests, bishop, priests, deacons, and religious, but the lay people was not very involved in all this process. So in Italian, he was able to express his desire in one word, which was aggiornamento, which means an update. The church must be brought up to date, must adapt itself to meet the challenging conditions of modern times. More than words, Italian appreciate expressive gestures. So Pope John the 23rd, when asked to reveal his intentions, he simply moved to a window and threw it open and let a draught of fresh air, saying, "I want to open the windows of the church so we can see out and the people can see in." This was not going to be accomplished by himself, but for everyone in the church under the leadership of his successors, Pope Paul VI and our beloved John Paul II. So Paul VI was one who actually took the council to its conclusion, and Pope John Paul II took on the task of complete the reform of the current code of canon law. So that's how that happens. The Pope John the 23rd, he was the one who initiated the reform, but then he died, and then was Paul VI who took the council to his conclusion, and then it was John Paul II who several years later promulgated the code of canon law. And at that time, Paul Benedict, when the council began, he was actually a young theologian who was assisting bishops to implement and to write all the documents for the council. So it did require the action of 4 popes to accomplish all this. As I was reviewing this presentation for you yesterday, I realized, no, I should have the current one right in the middle, because it continually refers to the action and to the reform of the Second Vatican Council. So, in other words, what the Second Vatican Council intended. So Pope John the 23rd said to the media, "The purpose is to renew ourselves and the flocks committed to us, so that there may radiate before all men the lovable features of Jesus Christ who shines in our hearts, that God's splendor may be revealed." So the next question is, what the Second Vatican Council did for us. So indeed, we can affirm that we were blessed by the council in 3 different areas. So the first one, as I mentioned it before, was a real aggiornamento, a real update, an updated in doctrine, an adaptation in doctrine, practices, and structures. The second one is a real effort of Christian unity in order to unify all Christian churches, and not to lead us die by divisions between us. To this day, this has not been totally accomplished. There have been a lot of developments with the Anglicans and with the Protestant churches, the Lutherans, but we cannot say that the Catholic Church is just one church without divisions. We're still working on that. And third, a real call of participation and communion, especially of the laity, invited to assume many responsibilities in the church's ministry. The Second Vatican Council and the new Code of Canon Law were actually magnus events of ecclesiastical, theological, and ecumenical nature. So those four categories. So they were magnus events, in the ecclesial way, theological, ecumenical, and legal aspects. The first one was convened. I mean, the Second Vatican Council was convened in the 4 years from 1962 through 1965. Pope John the 23rd convoked the council on October 11th, 1962, and with bishops from all over the world sought to define the nature, scope, and mission of the church. Just to give you some data, I'm sure you have seen pictures of the 2,908 clergy invited to attend the council. 450 attended the council. And the council was closed on December 8, 1965, on the pontificate of Paul VI. The council produced 16 documents, some of which are described as the greatest expressions of Catholic social teaching in Church's history. The Second Vatican Council marked a fundamental shift toward modern Church. The decision of the Council, especially those regarding the liturgy, affected the lives of Catholics around the world. After the Second Vatican Council, the use of the vernacular language was permitted in the celebration of the Mass, and in the 1970, the new Sacramentary and Novus Ordo, New Order of the Mass, were established. Increased participation by the laity distinguished Catholic life after the Second Vatican Council. Bible study groups, marriage encounter, social action organizations, and the charismatic movement are fruits of the Second Vatican Council. The Second Vatican Council made possible that many post-conciliar official church documents on Catholic social teaching. So that any of you remember attending the Mass in Latin? And then when the priest was, exactly. Do you remember when that changed? Do you remember anything in you, any reaction?
Angry people.
Angry people?
Yeah.
Yeah, different people were confused.
Okay, many confusing
Yeah.
people, okay.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, I was a young man, young kid when it happened. It was profound.
Yeah, exactly. It was for many people it was very profound. Exactly. So we still have some things, on that.
And I think I can add some light to that. I've been part of the St. Francis Xavier Church for 30 years. When I started going to church there, we didn't have kneelers. Then we had modern chairs that were cushioned. Then we went back to wood pews, and then we got our kneelers back, and that was in the period of 20 years. That kind of confusion.
Oh, really?
That's confusion. That's liturgical confusion.
Yes.
Do we kneel now? Do we not kneel anymore?
Well, even I went to St. Joseph in Ogden growing up. And then when St. James was built, St. James is just at northern end of Ogden. The old church, they have a new church now, but it was almost a hexagon type of approach. The altar was in the middle, and the new chairs were around the priest, and no kneelers, and you had to kneel on the carpet. But you didn't have the view of St. Joe where the priest had his back to you, and that beautiful altar. Now the priest was in the middle of the building, and everybody sort of around him, different views, no kneelers. It was just different.
Yes.
It was just different.
So that's probably one of the most visible changes, the liturgy. However,
Yeah.
the Code of Canon Law does not regulate all the details of the liturgy. They gave us some elements, but liturgy is regulated by additional documents. After the Second Vatican Council and after the reform of the Code of Canon Law, so we have all this reform of the New Order of the Mass, and the sacraments, because it's just totally regulated, under a different code.
So RCIA wouldn't fall under canon law, only in the exception of like judging a marriage or something.
Oh, no, it does for the basic norms, but the specific norms are kind of given to a different document. So we will see the difference between all these acts, because all of these are basically juridical acts. So when the church announced a particular law, then we have the general statement. But then people come with questions. Oh, what about this? What about this? This law doesn't cover this part. Then is when we have the instructions, which are kind of additional documents that come and explain how that law is going to be implemented. And then we have all these other documents, apostolic letters, and apostolic instructions, kind of addressing that particular part of the law, in detail, if it is liturgical, or if it is sacramental, or if it is something related to church structure or management. So the law in the beginning is very general and require a lot of study and explanation how it's going to be implemented. So, and in the process, then we see different changes. Like if you for example, if you go through Europe, you see many old churches that maintain that, the altar, they move the altar to the center, and then the people around. And along the years, many of these churches has been sold to Lutherans or to Methodists, and they keep it like that. But for the Catholics, try to maintain the regular structure, the altar, and the pews and the kneelers. So. Okay, well, let's just try to keep this moving a bit. More questions will come after we discuss all this. So those are the kind of the implications of the reform with the Second Vatican Council, and then it will come. The legal part will come with the reform of the Code of Canon Law. While the basic doctrines of the Church did not change with the Council, its influence and documents created more profound changes for Catholics, for the Catholic Church that occurred in the previous 500 years. Since Pope John the 23rd spoke of the opening of the windows of the Church, great and gradual changes have occurred. The Council began with tremendous emphasis on the theology of communion and participation. And when you study a theology, it's a lot said about the theology of communion and participation. The need to understand basic concept of unity and diversity in virtue of our own Christian baptism, and the need to invigorate our faith with social works for peace and justice. The legacy of the Second Vatican Council came to us with the presentation of 16 documents classified as follows. So, we have 4 constitutions, 9 decrees, and 3 declarations. Each one of them in a different topic related to faith, to the faith of all Christians. So before I announce each one of these documents, let me give you a definition of the concept: apostolic constitution, a decree, and declaration. So just although you have addressed the documents with the proper names already. So an apostolic constitution, the Latin Constitutio Apostolica, is the highest levels of decree issued by the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. The use of the term constitution comes from the Latin constitutio, which referred to any important law issued by the Roman Emperor, and is retained in church documents because of the inheritance that the canon law of the Roman Catholic Church received from Roman law. By their nature, apostolic constitutions are addressed to the public. Generic constitutions use the title apostolic constitution and treat on solemn matters of the Church. such as the promulgations of statutes or definite teachings. The forms dogmatic constitution and pastoral constitution are titles sometimes used to be more descriptive as to the document purpose. Apostolic constitutions are issued as papal bulls due to their solemn public form, which we don't hear the word that much. Before they used to say, a bulla pontificia, is going to be announced, and we don't hear that word anymore. But the constitutions are kind of the equivalent of that. The next highest category after apostolic constitution is an encyclical letter. We hear it continually. The Pope is going to write an encyclical on this or that, so we hear that continually. So the apostolic constitution is kind of the highest way that the Pope has to speak to the world in a matter related to doctrine or other practical matters. Now, a decree is an order made by a head of a state or government and having the force of law. That the particular term used for this concept may vary from country to country. The executive orders made by the President of the United States, for example, are decrees. In non-legal English usage, however, the term rule by decree refers to any authoritarian decision, and in this sense, it can be seen as often derogatory. So a decree is an order, and like in the work that I do, when we finish a case of annulment, then I issue a decree. So and the people always say normally, oh, I got an annulment. That's the way people say it. But if they will be correctly say, I have a decree of a decree of declaration of invalidity. If there will be, if we use the words more technical. So, but anyway, but a decree is an order, but it's a lower degree than the Constitution. And now in law, a declaration ordinarily refers a judgment of the court or an award of an arbitration tribunal inviting an adjudication of rights or other legal relations of the parties which does not provide for or an order enforcement. Where the declaration is made by the court, it is usually referred to as a declaratory judgment. Less commonly, where the declaratory relief is awarded by an arbitrator, it is normally called declaratory award. In the Roman Catholic Church, a declaration is a statement about a particular issue of significant importance in the life of the church. More important to some people than to the others, and we will see which one are the declarations and how some of them are very important for us in the United States, and some of them are not that important. But the church has to cover not only the U.S. or Canada or Latin America. The church has to cover the whole world. So that's why some decrees are more important than others, and some declarations are more important than others. Depends where do you live. So let me refer now each one of them briefly. So now we have. How do I go back?
Click the first button. Oh, okay.
I don't. Well, I can do nothing more.
This and go previous.
Oh, previous, okay. Previous. Okay, okay. All right. Thank you. So this first group presented 4 constitutions, so I'm just going to say the names. So the Sacrosanctum Concilium is the constitution of the sacred liturgy. And this is very important because the liturgy is something we have to manage every single day. However, the Constitution gives us only kind of the basic principles, and then particular things are addressed by different documents after the council with the post-conciliar documents. Then we have the Lumen Gentium, which is the constitution on the church, and the Dei Verbum, which is the constitution of divine revelation, and the Gaudium et Spes, the constitution of the church in the modern world. These four are very important, each one of them, because they address different aspects of the doctrine of the church, and the Gaudium et Spes refer kind of the presence of the church in the world today.
Is there a difference between, with these four constitutions, do they address both dogma and doctrine? Or is it in the Constitution it's always dogma?
Well, the Dei Verbum is the one who address all the dogmatic things, in divine revelation and tradition. The Sacrosanctum Concilium, although some of the parts are very dogmatic, because it's what we believe, the real presence of God in the Eucharist, and the reception of sanctifying grace through the sacraments, all that is doctrine. But then becomes more practical as it applies to the regular liturgy. So I would say it's dogmatic, but it's more practical. And then the Lumen Gentium is very dogmatic, because that refers the nature of the church, where the church came from. And Gaudium et Spes is probably the most practical one. But every time we refer to practical things in the church, we refer to something we believe. And whenever we refer to something we believe, we are touching the doctrine of the church. Things that do not change. That's why I say in the beginning, the Second Vatican Council didn't change the dogmas of the church, of the doctrine. It kind of went further to study those and to try to give to the people for a better understanding. So those are the four constitutions. Now the second group are the decrees, and they are we have 9 of them. So 9 decrees. So Inter Mirifica, which address the means of social communication in the church. So these decrees, remember, address different areas of lifestyle and activities of the church. So the church started kind of saying how to deal with the means of social communication. Now, do you believe that much has to be said now than when the Second Vatican Council was concluded? Of course, because social media has evolved so much after 1965. It's so much to be said, and there are so many other documents on how to use all these internet things and Facebook. It's a lot of those documents. If you go to the Vatican site, you see all the documents through the different congregations. Now the next document is Unitatis Redintegratio, which is the decree on ecumenism, which is the relation with other Christian churches, which became very, very fundamental for the life of the church in this century, and we're still working on that continually. Part of the result of this decree are the relations with the Lutherans and the unity of many of the Anglicans that came and joined the Catholic Church, and then forming that particular diocese all over the world, where all the Anglicans came after joining the Catholic Church. Now we have the Orientalis Ecclesiarum, which is a decree on Catholic churches of the Eastern Rite. So some of those probably, bless you, some of those probably don't come as important to us when it comes to Eastern Rite. Now we have Christus Dominus, which is the decree concerning the pastoral office of bishops in the Catholic Church. That becomes very, very important for bishops. and how to relate to the people in every diocese, and how to relate to the Supreme Pontiff. And then Optatam Tosius, which is the decree on priestly training, which is very important for the personnel that work in the seminaries, and vocation offices. The Apostolic Actuositatem, this is important for us because it's the decree of the apostolate of the laity. So that this one was the base for so many development, in the role of the lay people in the church. Presbyterorum Ordinis, which is the decree on the ministry and life of priests. Ad Gentes, which is on the missionary activity of the church. And Perfecti Caritatis, which is the renewal of religious life in the church. So every single one of these decrees address a different aspect of life in the church. Some of them are more important for us. Like the Perfecti Caritatis is probably not really important for us because none of us are members that belongs to a religious community. But in a diocese where we have religious presence, it's important for them. Now the third group is composed by 3 declarations. So the first one is Nostra Aetate, which is the declaration on the relations of the church to non-Christian and religious, and then we have what we call the religious dialogue. So there is a difference between this one and the one we already mentioned before, the Unitatis Redintegratio, which is a decree, which is a decree on ecumenism, and then this one is on the relation between the church and non-Christian religion. So when the church relates to another Christian church, then it's an ecumenical relation. But when we relate to other churches that are not Christians, we don't have an ecumenical relation with them. We have a religious dialogue. And the main example for that, for our reality, is our relation with the LDS Church. The LDS Church they describe themselves as a Christian church, but they are not recognized as Christian churches by others. So what we have with them is a religious dialogue. If ever the LDS Church would like to have an ecumenical relation with the Catholic Church, then we will have to deal first of all with the issues of doctrine, how to harmonize those, which is going to be very difficult.
So is there anything in these documents that say that the LDS Church is not a Christian church?
No. That comes later. That comes later in 2001, when the Congregation for the Faith issued a statement on the invalidity of the Mormon baptism, and then it addressed all these other aspects. So it's a hard topic to discuss.
Delicate.
Delicate. When you go to do a presentation and there is LDS people there, and you have to tell them that they have an invalid baptism and they are not counted as Christians, you have to use better words.
But the thing that I don't understand about that is they don't recognize my baptism.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I have told them many times. I don't know why you have a problem hearing these things, because you don't recognize our sacraments, and we don't share the same doctrine. Because they became a little agitated when they hear things like that. But that was defined by the Congregation for the Faith in June of 2001, when the decree of invalidity of Mormon baptism came out, and then the document explained all this. Many authors. I did my dissertation on canon law on the juridical structure of marriage in Mormonism and Catholicism.
Oh, wow.
So,
You're the expert.
So So when we come to this point, I remember reading this author that was saying, yes, the Catholic Church does not recognize the LDS Church as a Christian church, and the Christian world does not. The Lutherans, the Anglicans, they do not recognize them as a Christian church. However, we can say they are a new way of understanding Christianity. And I find the statement kind of very, very moderate to expose, and if you are doing a presentation for an ecumenical group, it's much easier to say, you are not recognized as a traditional Christian church, but you are probably a new expression of Christianity. That is much easier to swallow than to say you are not Christian. Period. And it's much more gentle. So anyway, so okay. Well, we will say a little bit more on Mormons later. So the relation with other churches that are not Christian we establish our religious dialogue, and this when it comes to the relation with the Muslims and with the Buddhists, with the people that is not Christian. It's very used, for all these other churches that are not Christian in nature. Now we have Gravissimo de Educaciones, which is the decree on Christian education, and we have Dignitatis Humanae on religious freedom. When we live here in the U.S., in general in North or Central or South America, where there are religious freedom, we do not perceive that as important. However, you have to keep in mind that the Catholic Church has to deal with countries where Christians are not allowed to practice their faith. China. They have to hide. China. So this document for them is very important. And the way Rome deals with the issues of China, is when you read things, the things that people has to do to attend mass or to receive a sacrament. I mean, the sacrifice they have to do, all the hiding and all that, it becomes kind of important to appreciate that we have religious freedom, and some people don't. Okay, so this is the whole group of documents. So keep in mind that after all this, once the council was concluded, the group, the commission that did the reformation of the Code of Canon Law has to take every and each one of these paragraphs in every of these documents and to translate it into law. And then it came with this one, which is the Code of Canon Law. This one looks big because has the commentary, which is very important to understand. However, other versions of the code, depends how it was printed, comes in a much more. Okay, that one. But I have this is the old one.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is the old one. I have this one in my office too, and I was going to bring it to the class, but it's filled up with a lot of notes that I have to, and I say this just will be too revealing to bring that one. So I bring the one that doesn't have any notes. And this one is the one in Spanish from the School of Salamanca that has a very, very good commentaries, but this is the way they printed it. But some of the versions are much more friendly than the others. This almost looks like a brick, and I have another one that is much bigger. But the notes are very important when you are studying a particular topic. You have to see how it's explained, and I like this one because the law of the church is written in Latin, and after that is written in all languages. So for me to be able to see the words in Latin helps a lot in the understanding on how to interpret certain laws. I'm always curious why in English we have godparents for baptism, but then for confirmation we have sponsors. It's like for different sacraments we have the person supporting the recipient of the sacrament, but it used different words. But in the Latin and the Spanish world, it's just one word used, which is patrinus, which in Spanish comes into padrino, which is you have padrinos for baptism, confirmation, for everything. And it's just one word, you know. But in English, you have for this sacrament, we use different words in English. But in Latin, it's just one word for all the sacraments, which is patrinus, which is padrino. So anyway, so it's kind of, sometimes it's just a matter of curiosity. Okay, let's continue. If we eventually get into the code. The decision to renew the Code of Canon Law was taken with two others, which we already have mentioned that with Pope John the 23rd spoke on the same day. They concerned his desire to hold a synod of the Diocese of Rome and to convoke an ecumenical council. So the ecumenical council was very important for us. But the Council of Rome, which we didn't hear much about it, and you wouldn't be concerned about that one. But it happened at the same time. The council, it happens the Second Vatican Council and the Synod of Rome, and then it came the reform of the Code of Canon Law. So even if the former, the Synod of Rome, does not have much importance on the reform of the code, the later on the hand, namely council, is one of the greatest importance of our theme, and is closely linked to the substance we are referring. Following the order of time, the task needed for the reform of the new Code of Canon Law could not begin until the council had ended. It was only until January 25, 1983, when the Church brought to its fulfillment the publication of the Code of Canon Law. In doing so, our thoughts turn back to the same day when Pope John the 23rd first publicly announced his personal desire to reform the existence body of the canonical laws, which had been promulgated on the Feast of Pentecost of 1997. So, since 1997, nobody has touched the Code of Canon Law until 1983, when the new one was promulgated. On the promulgation of the code, John Paul II stated, "In fact, a Code of Canon Law is absolutely necessary for the Church, since the Church is established in the form of a social and visible unit. It needs rules so that its hierarchical and organic structure may be visible, and it exercises the functions divinely instructed to it, particularly the sacred power of administration of the sacraments, as they are properly ordered, that the mutual relations of Christ faithful are reconciling justice based on charity, with the rights of each safeguard and defined, and lastly, that the common initiatives which are undertaken so that Christian life may be ever more perfectly carried out and supported, strengthened, and promoted by canonical laws." The same John Paul II concluded, "Canonical laws," canonical laws by their very nature demand observance. For this reason, the greatest care has been taken that in the long preparation of the code, there should be an accurate expression of the norms, and they should be depended upon and sound juridical, canonical, and theological foundation. Let me now refer some of the basic notions about canon law and how the Code of Canon Law is presented to the Church. So how do we define the current law of canon law? So I'm going to give you a simple definition which contains three parts. So the first part refers that canon law is a body of laws. It's a group of laws and regulations made by and adopted by ecclesiastical authority. So if somebody asks you what is canon law, it's a group of laws, it's a body of laws. Then the second part of this definition recognizes its area of action, that is to say that canon law is for the government of the Christian organization and its members. So that is the second part. That is the purpose, for the government of the Christian organization and its members. And then the third part shows us its origins by affirming that canon law came from, or is derived from the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the whole juridical and legislative tradition of the church. So that would be the definition of what is canon law. Is a body of laws and regulations made or adopted by the ecclesiastical authority for the government of the Christian organization and its members, that comes from the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the whole juridical and legislative tradition of the church. The most common sources for the canons are sacred scripture, natural law, customs or standing practices, the councils of the church, the ecumenical councils, the fathers of the church, and we refer to St. Chrysostom, St. Ambrose, St. Jerome, St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, then the popes and the bishops, and the rules of religious orders, Benedictine, Franciscan, Dominicans, Augustinians, the civil law, certain concordant agreements between church and states. So canon law is a complete tapestry woven from the two types of literary forms, which are doctrinal statements and norms of action. So you hear me saying that the most common sources for the canons are. So what do I mean by that? So this is the book of canon law. So unusually a book is divided in chapters, but the code of canon law is not divided in chapters. It's divided in books. So you open it inside and you don't see chapter 1, chapter 2. You see book 1, book 2, book 3, book 4, and then after the books, every book is divided in chapters, and every law is announced by a number, but we call every number a canon. Canon 1 of the Code of Canon Law, Canon 2, Canon 3. So when you hear the word canon so and so, canon number so defined, the obligation of the baptized. So that means it's a particular number that address a particular law. So when you hear the word canons, are the numbers how the law is announced. So let's just give you an example. So if we want to define, see, I like to use this canon because it's give us a very good definition of the people of God. So we are going to read Canon 2004. So if you want to read it for us, is the one in black. The rest are commentary. So this is the definition of the Christian faithful. So how Canon 2004 define the Christian faithful?
The Christian faithful are those who, inasmuch as they have been incorporated in Christ through baptism, have been constituted as the people of God. For this reason, made sharers in their own way in Christ's priestly, prophetic, and royal function. They are called to exercise the mission which God has entrusted to the church to fulfill in the world in accordance with condition proper to each. This church, constituted and organized in the world as a society, subsists in the Catholic Church, governed by the successor of Peter and the bishops in communion with him.
Okay. So that particular canon is very doctrinal. And then if we read the commentary, then the commentary will say this part comes from Gaudium et Spes, this part comes from Lumen Gentium, you will see all the numbers attached. So how that particular doctrine came into law. So I always say that there are two types of forms that, into the canon. So some canons are doctrinal contain doctrinal statement because it comes from the creed or it comes from expressions of the church faith. Like this one is very doctrinal. Other canons are norms of action that come from different actions. For example, exhortations, when somebody is called to do something, or the church express appreciation, for example, for the Catholic education, or maybe for the joy of lay associations. Some other norms of action they can be admonitions, which is an admonition is kind of a warning that tells us this is good or this is bad. So sometimes the church gives us admonitions on how to use the media, and how to avoid dangerous companions, dangerous doctrines, dangerous groups. Sometimes the canon is expressed as a directive, like how to maintain communion, how to show pastoral care for different realities. Sometimes are precepts. A precept, we will see it later, is something that is given to us as an order, something we have to do. So sometimes the canon is expressed how to record the marriage in the church, how to hear the finance council in the church. So it's kind of a mandate. Sometimes it comes in the way of prohibitions. For example, clerics cannot assume public offices. Clerics cannot sell property without permission of the ordinary. So there are certain prohibitions to the clerics and to the lay people. Sometimes it comes in a form of a penalty. For example, a confessor, what happened to a confessor that breaks the seal of confession, the sacramental sigillum? Or what about if somebody attack the Holy Father? What is the penalty attached to that? And sometimes the canon is expressed in a form of procedure. So what is the procedure to follow a process of annulment? What about if a lay person committed a crime? How to make this notification to a certain person after the bishop has made a decision? So those are procedures. And some others are constitutional elements. For example, who is incorporated into the body of Christ? What are the prophetic and royal offices in the church? What are the obligations attached to the Pope, bishops, and clerics in the church? Those are constitutional elements. So the canons are described and written in different ways, so different ways in the way of norms of action. Now let me stop here for a few minutes to explain that as we see all these laws, in the Code of Canon Law, there are different types of law in the church. So the most important law is divine law, or law that has been revealed through the Scripture. For example, the Ten Commandments that mandates peaceful interaction of people through respect, cooperation, and solidarity. But there are other types of laws that are ecclesiastical laws, or laws made by the Pope and the bishops of the church. So ecclesiastical laws fall into many different categories. They can be liturgical laws. Those laws tell us how to worship. Sacramental laws, how to celebrate the sacraments. Ecumenical laws, how to work with other Christians. So there are many types of ecclesiastical laws. What is the difference between the divine law and the ecclesiastical law? So the divine law doesn't change. It cannot be changed. But the ecclesiastical laws can be changed. They can be modified over time. The Code of Canon Law cannot contain all the laws of the church, as canon law explains, for the most